In this video, I'll speak about the biodiversity and micromanagement of species and living organisms on this planet. And I will speak about how this is not just that it doesn't, although to many people, the idea is that this world is too perfect to just have happened by accident. And I think that that claim is really one that is not exactly true. I don't think you could totally say that. And you could say the same fucking argument. Why would a all-powerful God that's perfect make 2-year-old kids with tumors on their head that basically bleed to death or are dying in excruciating pain? That makes no sense either. And it makes even less sense that God and the devil and people these powerful that have control of our lives would even care enough to control at that point. And you're so perfect, I don't see why they would even have emotions like that in the first place. So it just seems really fucking odd, really strange, and I don't think it really makes any sense. But I will talk right now about the biodiversity. I say yes, it is possible for this to happen by accident. A lot more possible, in my personal opinion, than that some God would make children that would have things like Black Death and AIDS and all kinds of fucked up things happen to little children. I mean, it doesn't make any sense. But what I will start with is, first off, there are known species, and it's thought that there's actually life likely on all planet forms, because there's species of microorganisms that live in the rock of the earth, and they use chemicals from the rocks to sustain life. And it's thought that all planets, or many parts of the world, of the universe, have these microorganisms which feed off of rock, and these things could be put in, I mean, like 1,000 degrees temperatures. They could be put into 500 negative temperatures. They could be put into volcanoes, and these things don't even get bothered and can still live. So it is very possible that that kind of life is on every planet, and if a set environment makes it so these things could survive, push forward into new species, then that set environment will push forward. And it makes perfect sense that it is possible for just a simple life form, just so simple, to be almost related to a rock, almost like a small chemical reaction or something that caused almost like came out from the rocks themselves, and therefore created these organisms somehow from the chemical mixes and certain things. But you're talking, I mean, these are things that are just very prehistoric, very small organisms, and that it is impossible. I mean, you have algae, and algae, or in plants, give off carbon. They feed off of carbon dioxide, give off oxygen. We do the opposite. We breathe in oxygen and we give off carbon dioxide. It's a feeding effect. This feed effect between species in a micromanaged environment creates a progression. If you don't have that, I don't think we would be able to progress as far as we have. And through millions and millions of years, this has created biodiversity and micromanaged environments to the point where these micromanaged environments can actually be destroyed just by a simple new species coming in, because of millions and millions of years of micromanage, and whatever fail would die out. And over many millions of years, this would create a perfect, well, not exactly perfect, but a close to imperfect environment which could have quite complex life instead of these microorganisms. And I think it is quite possible, and everything had to come from one source. And there had to be one point where algae drifted off to become the opposite force. There had to be the point where algae, which fed off of carbon dioxide, fed off carbon dioxide, gave off oxygen, that for some reason one of these algae at one point had to have become an opposite effect, and would actually feed off the algae themselves and become a opposite reaction. And there had to have been a point where that happens, and it's a branch. There has to be something similar to this, and that it is possible over millions of years. And say if there's one genetic of algae that can actually be the opposite, and instead of feeding off of carbon dioxide, all of a sudden one algae has a genetic change, and it could feed off of the algae's giving off oxygen themselves and use oxygen, and at this point it survives. But all the other ones before that, say if it didn't quite get it right, would die off, and thus create a micromanaged biodiversity, and then there had to be a point where this whole pattern would increase to the point where we would have both, and then I mean it would go both different directions. You would have it progress. I mean, it's a feeding effect without energy and matter and certain reactions going on, and these opposite forces creating extra energy to push forward. Then this would not be able to work. I mean, the same thing goes with carnivores. I mean, there had to been a point where carnivores were in fact herbivores. I mean, there could have been one deer or something, let's just pretend, that became a carnivore and started eating deer instead of eating plants. They maybe say it was from starvation, and all of a sudden that goes. I mean, it could be the same thing with algae. Perhaps there was a point in Earth where there was lack of carbon dioxide, and that was actually more efficient for a certain type of algae to evolve to feed off of each other and actually use the oxygen and other algae were using to give a feedback effect of carbon dioxide back to the algae. I mean, it makes sense that there could have been a point where these algae could have almost died off, but for some reason it pushed forward a natural selection where the feeding effect of the two separate algae type species could have fed each other to survive when there was nothing else too. Same thing goes with the carnivores. You had been a point where carnivores were likely dying off, caused a natural selection, and thus carnivores came about from the herbivores that found that meat gave them a survival. And I mean, there had been a point where that. So it's like from there on you have a branch. I mean, maybe you have first deer who are carnivores, and you could have deer with big teeth and fangs, and then then deer that can become more carnivore-like, maybe different senses, more better smell, different. I mean, and then from there it could split off. There could be one that could go back to an herbivore. There could be different set points, and wherever failed would die off, and from there on what would die off would just create a micromanaged biodiversity over millions of years, to the point where if we introduce a new species from Europe, say to America, all of a sudden it could wipe out entire lands and other species. So it is quite micromanaged, but you have to realize through all this time that it is possible for it to happen. Like I said, from natural selection, whatever doesn't survive will die off, and thus that will create, over many millions of years, a micromanaged biodiversity. I think it's quite logical, and at times things fail. It's obvious. There must have been mass extinctions, there's been everything, and whatever failed would come back from the roots and create to the point where it was almost perfect. Through almost like a trial and error, but not actually purposeful trial and error, just trial and error from natural selection. Yeah, I think it makes sense. I mean, it makes a lot more sense than a so-called perfect God creating little 2-year-olds with tumor growths going off to them and who are screaming in pain. That doesn't fucking make sense. I mean, it's far more logical from the scientific. Do I think there could be a God? I think it's quite possible that it could be almost like an energy force that we can't see. It's most likely faceless. And I don't think it looks like human, and I don't think it has feelings like us, because we're a little selfish and we like to think that God looks like us and feels like us. But it's probably much more like the Star Wars, the Force. There's a force, there's an energy. It's like almost like a God. It's there. I mean, the idea like, oh God, He created this and He destroys us. I mean, we play a better God than Him, because I could go, or someone could make a nuclear bomb and kill millions of people, and God can't even do a damn thing about that. I mean, that's kind of a joke. I mean, if God tells us when our time's up and we can manipulate that ourselves and make a bomb and kill millions of people, then we're playing God and we're ahead of Him, so it doesn't make any fucking sense. Anyways, this video is done.